Have you ever walked into a place where you should have felt welcome, only to be treated like you didn't belong? Imagine standing in the center of a store, hearts staring at you, whispers in the air, and a manager pointing to the door, saying you're not worthy to be there. What would you do? Stay quiet and walk away, or stand tall, even as security is called to escort you out? Now imagine the twist. What if that very store was yours? What if you were the one who built it, owned it, and carried its future in your hands? This is the story of Danielle Carter, a woman who faced humiliation, prejudice, and the crushing weight of being judged by appearance. But in that moment, she made a choice to stand her ground, to reveal the truth, and to change not just her own fate, but the culture of every store she owned. What would you have done in her place? Would you have found the courage to stay? Stay with us, because this story will make you question, reflect, and maybe even heal a part of your own journey. Like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The store was buzzing with the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the subtle notes of piano music piping through hidden speakers. Customers moved slowly between glass counters, their hands brushing along displays of diamond necklaces, gold bracelets, and handbags that cost more than a month's rent in most American cities. It should have been an ordinary afternoon at Prescott & Miles Luxury, a high-end boutique located in the heart of downtown Chicago. But nothing about this afternoon would turn out ordinary. At precisely 2:17 p.m., the front door swung open and a woman stepped inside. She didn't look like the usual clientele. No designer labels, no expensive perfume trailing in her wake, no air of old money. Instead, she wore a simple gray sweater, dark jeans, and sneakers that had clearly seen many miles of city sidewalks. Her hair was tied back, her face bare of makeup. In her right hand, she carried a reusable grocery tote, folded neatly. Her name was Danielle Carter. The moment Danielle entered, a hush fell over the store, not because she was loud, but because she was quiet in a space that demanded display. Heads turned. A couple near the watch counter exchanged glances. A saleswoman near the handbags pursed her lips, and from across the room, behind the marble service desk, the store manager narrowed his eyes. Gregory Miles had worked here for over 20 years, tall, with thinning blonde hair and a permanent crease between his eyebrows. Gregory was the kind of man who carried authority in his posture even when he said nothing. He prided himself on protecting the brand, and in his mind, that meant deciding who belonged and who didn't. To him, Danielle did not belong. "Excuse me," Gregory called, his voice slicing through the soft music. "Can I help you with something?" Danielle paused. She lifted her head, her gaze steady, and replied softly, "I'm just browsing." Gregory's lips curled. He stepped from behind the counter, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Customers nearby watched the exchange with interest. Some already pulled out their phones, pretending to check messages while recording discreetly. "Browsing," Gregory repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Ma'am, this is a luxury establishment. Our merchandise is not for casual browsing. Perhaps you're looking for the outlet stores down the street." Danielle's face betrayed nothing. No anger, no embarrassment, only stillness, the kind that unsettles those expecting compliance. "I know exactly where I am," she said. Gregory crossed his arms. "Look, I don't mean to be unkind, but we've had incidents. People wandering in, touching things they can't afford, sometimes walking out with them. I have to be careful." The words hung in the air. People like you. He hadn't said them outright, but everyone heard them in the spaces between his sentences. A customer near the entrance whispered to his wife. Another shook his head and walked away, not wanting to get involved. The tension in the boutique was suddenly heavy, pressing against every pane of glass. Danielle exhaled slowly. Her eyes moved across the display's rings under bright halogen lights, watches arranged with military precision, handbags locked behind sliding glass doors. Her steps were deliberate, her voice calm. "I understand caution," she replied, "but you don't understand me." Gregory felt his authority challenged. His voice rose, sharper now. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to leave. This is not the place for you." The words came louder than he intended, bouncing off marble floors and glass counters. A small crowd began to gather at a polite distance, sensing drama. A man in a business suit muttered, "This is gonna be something." Danielle's heart beat faster, but she refused to let it show. Inside, memories flickered, times she had been followed in department stores, moments when clerks assumed her credit card would decline, times when her presence alone was treated like a threat. She whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, "Not again. Not this time." But aloud she only said, "Is that your final word, Gregory?" Now, emboldened by the watching crowd, gestured toward the door. "Yes, please exit the store before I call security." Phones were raised higher now. The atmosphere had shifted. What began as curiosity was now tension on display. Shoppers wanted to see what this woman would do. Danielle stood still. She could feel every eye on her, hear the faint hum of the air vents, even sense the unease of a young sales associate standing frozen behind the jewelry counter. For a moment, she thought of her mother, of a memory decades old standing outside a store just like this one, holding her mother's hand, wishing they could step inside without fear. Her mother's voice echoed one day, "Baby, you'll walk in here with your head held high." Danielle straightened her shoulders. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly. Gregory's jaw tightened. He motioned toward the security panel on the wall, his hand hovering near the phone. "All right then," he snapped. "If you won't leave willingly, I'll have the police escort you out." Gasps rippled through the store. A woman whispered, "This is too much." A man muttered, "Why doesn't she just go?" Another replied, "No, she's standing her ground." Danielle's calm unnerved everyone. She did not shout, did not flinch. Instead, she folded her arms gently across her chest and looked Gregory directly in the eye. "Do what you think is right," she said. The simplicity of her words unsettled him. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. But pride pushed him forward. He lifted the phone. Outside, traffic honked along Michigan Avenue. Inside, the boutique felt like the stage of a play. Every shopper an unwilling actor, every camera phone a spotlight. The curtain was only beginning to rise. Danielle Carter did not move as Gregory Miles clutched the phone in his hand, his jaw tight with determination. The eyes of strangers burned into her skin, but her mind wandered elsewhere, slipping back through the years like pages turning in a book she had read too many times. She remembered being 8 years old, holding her mother's hand on a winter afternoon in Detroit. Snowflakes had clung to her braids, melting slowly into drops that chilled her neck. They had stopped outside Beaumont Jewelers, a store with gleaming window displays of pearls and watches that seemed too bright for their little world. Her mother, Clara Carter, had pressed her mittened hand against the glass. "One day," Clara whispered. You'll walk into a place like this, and you won't feel small. One day, you'll buy not just one thing, but anything you want, Danielle had asked. But how we don't have money. Clara squeezed her hand gently. We have faith. We have work. We have dignity. Those are the things that will carry you. That night. Danielle lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, repeating her mother's words. She had promised herself silently, fiercely, that she would grow strong enough to carry them both. Years later, after Clara passed from a sudden illness, Danielle had nothing but that promise. She worked through college waiting tables, tutoring kids, mopping the floors of offices that smelled of stale coffee. Each paycheck was stretched to cover books and bus fare, and every time she wanted to quit, she remembered that window, that whisper one day. Now, decades later, standing in this Chicago boutique with its marble floors and chandeliers, Danielle could almost feel her mother's hand again, warm and steady. But the memory wasn't just about hope, it was also about pain. At 16, Danielle had walked into a store much like this one with two friends. They had just finished their shifts at a diner and decided to treat themselves by trying on prom shoes. As soon as Danielle touched a pair of heels, the clerk had rushed over. "You need to leave those alone," the woman barked. "This isn't a thrift store." Danielle's friends had laughed nervously, pretending not to care, but Danielle had felt the sting deep in her chest. That sting returned every time she entered a space where she was judged first and known later, if at all. So, when Gregory pointed at her with that same tone of dismissal, the past folded into the present like two mirrors reflecting each other. Inside, Danielle's heart whispered, "This is not just about me. It never was. It's about every time my mother was made invisible, every time a girl like me was pushed aside, every time we were told we don't belong." The thought made her stand taller. Across the boutique, a young sales associate named Samantha Ortiz stood frozen, barely 22. Samantha had started working at Prescott and Miles just 3 months earlier. She knew Gregory's reputation quick to anger, ruthless with staff who dared to cross him. She wanted to say something, but fear gripped her. What if she lost her job? What if no one backed her up? Her eyes flicked toward Danielle, who stood with quiet strength, then back to Gregory, whose voice grew sharper as he threatened police involvement. Samantha's chest tightened. She remembered her own mother telling her stories of being ignored into stores when she first arrived from Mexico. The parallel was impossible to ignore. Danielle, unaware of Samantha's silent struggle, kept her eyes fixed on Gregory. For a moment, she thought of all the titles she now carried: CEO of Carter Holdings, majority shareholder of Prescott and Miles, chairwoman of 2 nonprofit boards. She thought of the skyscraper office on Lakeshore Drive where her name gleamed on polished glass. She could have revealed her identity right then and silenced Gregory with a single sentence. But she didn't, because this moment wasn't just about winning a personal battle. It was about exposing the sickness beneath the surface, about making visible what too often remained hidden. Gregory's voice cut through her thoughts. "Ma'am, last warning. Leave now or face the consequences. Consequences." The word clanged in her ears. She thought of her father, a factory worker who once told her that consequences were never equal, that some people's mistakes were forgiven with a laugh, while others' smallest missteps became crimes. Danielle inhaled deeply, steadying herself, outwardly calm, inwardly restless. She felt the weight of history pressing against her. the ache of injustice colliding with the dignity her mother had planted in her heart. In the corner, a customer whispered to another, "She should just leave. It's not worth it." But Danielle knew better. If she left quietly, nothing would change. Gregory would continue to police who belonged and who didn't, and another woman, another girl, would walk into this same store one day and be made to feel less. She could not allow that cycle to repeat. Her mind flashed to the handbag she had glimpsed earlier near the front case. A Prescott heirloom clutch, the same design she had once seen in the window of Beaumont Jewelers with her mother. That bag had become a symbol in her life, a reminder of both longing and perseverance. If she could stand here in this store she now owned and claim her rightful place without flinching, it would not just fulfill her mother's whisper, it would rewrite every painful memory etched into her bones. And yet, the fear lingered, fear of humiliation, of escalation, of police siding with Gregory as they so often sided with people like him. She felt her pulse in her temples. She weighed her options in silence. Fight or fold, speak or swallow. Finally, she whispered to herself again, "Not this time." Her voice, when she spoke aloud, was steady. "I told you, I'm not leaving." Gregory's nostrils flared. "Then we'll let the police decide." He pressed the phone to his ear and began to dial. Samantha's breath caught. Her hands gripped the glass counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every fiber of her wanted to cry out, "Stop." She hasn't done anything wrong. But fear locked her jaw. Danielle remained motionless. Inside, though, she fought another battle against the urge to unleash her truth too soon, against the exhaustion of always having to prove herself. She wondered, would it even matter if I told him who I was? Or would he find another way to diminish me? The store felt like a stage suspended between silence and storm. Customers shuffled uneasily, their phones recording, their eyes darting between the woman in jeans and the manager in a pressed suit. Outside, the city roared on, unaware of the drama building behind the boutique's glass doors. Inside, Danielle Carter braced herself. The past and present had converged, and she knew the story was only beginning. She had faced humiliation before, but this time she would not just endure it, she would transform it. The ringing tone from Gregory's phone echoed louder than it should have in the polished boutique. The chandeliers glimmered overhead, their light bouncing off the glass counters, but the air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. Each second stretched longer, pulling the nerves of everyone who stood watching. Danielle's chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. On the outside, she looked composed, but inside she wrestled with the memory of every time authority had been turned into a weapon against people who looked like her. She thought of news stories, of hashtags that carried faces she would never meet but felt deeply connected to. She knew how quickly this scene could spiral if officers arrived and believed Gregory's version before hearing hers. A mother with two small children tugged them toward the exit, whispering, "Let's go, honey." The children looked back wide-eyed, sensing tension they couldn't fully understand. The younger one whispered, "Why are they mad at her?" But the mother pulled them out before an answer could come. Samantha Ortiz's pulse hammered in her ears. She could almost hear her manager's voice from training. The customer is always right, unless it puts the store at risk. But here, who was the customer? Really, Danielle hadn't raised her voice, hadn't stolen a thing. Yet Gregory towered above her as if she were a trespasser instead of a guest. "Sir." Samantha's voice cracked, quieter than she intended. Maybe we should. Gregory cut her off with a glare sharp enough to slice through glass. Not another word. "Samantha, I'll handle this." Danielle caught Samantha's eyes for the briefest moment. In that fleeting exchange, Danielle saw the young woman's fear, but also something else, an unspoken plea for courage. It struck Danielle like a chord, pulling her back to her own first job, where she too had felt powerless. Gregory began speaking into the phone. "Yes, this is Gregory Miles, manager at Prescott and Miles on Michigan Avenue. I need officers dispatched immediately. We have a situation with a suspicious individual refusing to leave the premises." His words were deliberate, dripping with false authority. Suspicious. Danielle flinched. Such a small word, yet it carried centuries of weight. Suspicious was the word that had justified so many injustices. Suspicious was the lie people like Gregory told to turn dignity into danger. A murmur rippled through the customers still lingering. Some whispered that maybe she had done something wrong. Others whispered the opposite, urging someone to step in. Phones were raised higher, recording from multiple angles now. Danielle's thoughts raced. Should she reveal who she was before the police arrived, or should she let the scene play out? Knowing the truth would cut deeper if it came later. Both choices carried risk. Both demanded strength. Gregory ended the call and turned back with a smirk that barely hid his contempt. "They'll be here soon. We'll let the authorities decide what to do with you." Danielle's voice was calm, but her words were sharp. "Do you often call the police on paying customers, Mr. Miles?" Gregory scoffed. "Not on paying customers, only on those who don't belong here." The phrase hung in the air like a slap. "Don't belong here." A young man near the back, no older than 25, shook his head and muttered loud enough to be heard. "That's messed up. Man." His friend tugged his sleeve, whispering for him to stay quiet, but the words were out, floating into the silence. Danielle's heart beat faster, but she held her ground. She thought of her mother again, and the promise she made to never shrink herself to fit someone else's narrow view. She would not leave. The door chimed as two more customers entered, unaware at first of the storm inside. They slowed, sensing the tension, their smiles fading as their eyes moved from Gregory's stern posture to Danielle's steady defiance. "Sir," Danielle said softly, "your words will follow you longer than you think." Gregory sneered. "And what about you refusing to cooperate, making a scene? Good luck walking away without consequences." Danielle felt the sting of his words, but something steadier rose within her, an anchor that kept her rooted. She had not come this far in life to bow to arrogance disguised as authority. Her mind flickered briefly to her office downtown, to the stack of documents waiting for her review, to the faces of her employees who depended on her leadership. She had built something real, something lasting. Yet here, in this store she technically owned. One man's prejudice tried to strip it away with a single phone call. The injustice was almost surreal. Samantha shifted on her feet, torn between silence and speech. Finally, she gathered a sliver of courage. "Mr. Miles," she said, her voice steadier this time. "She didn't do anything. Maybe you should double-check before." Gregory snapped. "Enough. Go check inventory in the back. Now." Samantha froze, then slowly turned, her face flushed with shame and frustration. She disappeared through a side door, but her heart pounded with guilt. She wanted to help, but fear had caged her again. Danielle watched her leave, sadness mingling with understanding. It was never easy to stand against power, especially when your livelihood hung by a thread. But seeds had been planted. Danielle could see it in Samantha's eyes. The sound of the sirens in the distance crept closer, faint but undeniable. A collective unease rippled through the room. Customers exchanged glances, some edging toward the door, others keeping their cameras trained on Danielle and Gregory as if history itself were unfolding. Danielle closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself for what came next. She whispered silently, not to Gregory, not to the customers, but to her mother's memory, I will not leave. I will not be erased. When she opened her eyes, she stood taller, her gaze unwavering. Gregory, mistaking her calm for defeat, smiled smugly. He had no idea the storm that was about to break over him. The sirens outside grew louder, a piercing reminder that the moment Gregory had engineered was now unavoidable. Danielle remained where she stood, her hands loose at her sides, though inside her chest her heart beat like a drum. She had trained herself for years to maintain composure, to hold her expression in check even when fury burned beneath the surface. That discipline was her shield now. The glass doors slid open with a gust of city air, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. Their boots echoed on the marble, their eyes sweeping the boutique. Conversations died instantly. A nervous hush filled the room. Gregory moved forward with all the confidence of a man certain the law was on his side. Officers, over here. This is the woman causing trouble. She refuses to leave. She's harassing staff and disrupting business. The older of the two officers, Sergeant Paul Hensley, squinted at Danielle. Ma'am, can we see some identification? His tone was firm, not hostile, but it carried the weight of authority that could shift the balance in an instant. Gregory folded his arms, standing just close enough to signal victory. She won't have anything legitimate, I promise you that. Danielle inhaled slowly. She reached into her bag, careful and deliberate, aware of every phone recording her. She retrieved her wallet, extended her driver's license, and waited. Sergeant Hensley studied it, then frowned slightly. Danielle Carter. He repeated the name as if trying to place it, but Gregory jumped in before the thought could land. Fake. I've seen it before. People making up names, trying to look official. She doesn't belong here. The second officer, Officer Rachel Moore, younger and more alert, tilted her head. Ma'am, what exactly were you doing in the store? Danielle's voice was calm, quiet but steady enough to be heard by every corner of the room. I walked in to make a purchase. I was told I didn't belong when I refused to leave without cause. Your services were requested. Gregory barked a laugh. She's twisting it. Classic behavior. You'll see. Sergeant Hensley's hand shifted near his belt. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step outside with us while we sort this out. A wave of murmurs rose from the customers. The young man who had spoken earlier muttered, This is wrong. But he didn't step forward. Fear still hung too heavy in the air. Danielle's mind raced. She had the power to end this right here. She could declare her ownership, reveal her authority. But she stayed silent, knowing timing was everything. If she spoke now, the truth might be dismissed as arrogance. If she waited, the truth would strike like lightning. Gregory leaned closer to the officers. She's resisting. You see how calm she is. That's practiced. She knows how to manipulate. The words sliced through Danielle like cold wind. Calmness, a virtue she had cultivated her whole life, was now twisted into evidence against her. Sergeant Hensley gestured. "Ma'am, please, step outside." Danielle lifted her chin. "I will not resist, but I will not leave under the shadow of a lie. If you escort me, do it knowing I have done nothing wrong." Her words resonated, solemn and deliberate, and phones captured every syllable. The officers exchanged a glance. Gregory, impatient, snapped, "Just cuff her already. She's wasting your time." And then, to Danielle's quiet horror, Sergeant Hensley pulled out the cuffs. The metallic click filled the air like thunder. Gasps rippled through the boutique. Samantha Ortiz reappeared from the back, her face pale. She froze as she saw the cuffs glinting in the light. Her heart screamed to intervene, but fear once again pinned her feet. Danielle extended her hand slowly. Her pulse raced, but her gaze never wavered. She thought of her employees, her investors, the communities she supported. She thought of her mother, whispering that dignity would carry her. As the cuffs snapped around her wrists, shame and fury collided inside her. Not for herself, she knew the truth would surface, but for the countless women before her who had been silenced, humiliated, erased without ever getting their moment of justice. The customers' murmurs grew into low protests. "She didn't do anything. This is ridiculous. Why are they cuffing her?" But no one yet dared to step closer. Gregory's grin widened. For the first time since she entered, he felt in control. "Take her out. Finally, this nonsense is over." The officers began to guide Danielle toward the door. Cameras followed, capturing every step. Danielle's heels clicked against the marble floor, steady and unhurried. She walked with a dignity that no cuff could erase. At the threshold, Danielle paused. She turned her head slightly toward the room, her voice calm but cutting. "Remember this moment. The truth has a way of coming to light." The words hung in the air as the doors slid shut behind her. Outside, the Chicago air was sharp against her skin. Flashing lights from the squad car painted the sidewalk red and blue. Pedestrians stopped, phones raised, voices questioning. What did she do? Why are they arresting her? Danielle stood by the squad car, the cuffs biting into her wrists, her gaze fixed forward. She felt humiliation press against her like a weight, but beneath it pulsed a quiet fire. This was not the end. This was the hinge. Inside the boutique. Samantha's hands trembled as she wiped down the counter pointlessly, her eyes glassy. She could still hear Danielle's last words. "The truth has a way of coming to light." Gregory strutted back behind the counter, brushing off the tension with a self-satisfied sigh. "Finally restored order," he muttered. But even as he said it, a knot of unease twisted in his gut. He didn't know why, but something told him this was far from over. For Danielle, being led into the police car was not defeat. It was the seed of transformation, and as the doors closed around her, she whispered silently again to her mother, "I will not be erased." The back seat of the squad car was colder than Danielle expected, the vinyl stiff beneath her hands cuffed behind her. The city noise outside carried on car horns, the hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, but inside the car there was only the low crackle of the radio. Sergeant Paul Hensley slid into the driver's seat while Officer Rachel Moore took the passenger side. Rachel glanced over her shoulder. her eyes searching Danielle's face. Something in Danielle's calm unsettled her. Most people in cuffs fidgeted, pleaded, or argued. This woman sat with quiet steadiness, her posture tall even in the cramped seat. "Ma'am," Rachel said carefully, "you'll be taken to the precinct for questioning. If there's something you'd like us to know, now's the time." Danielle's lips curved into the faintest smile. "What I'd like you to know will be clearer soon enough." Hensley frowned in the rearview mirror. "We don't have time for riddles. If you've got ID, if you've got credentials, this is the moment to show them." Danielle leaned forward slightly, her voice measured. "The identification you've already seen was real. My name is Danielle Carter, and I am not only a customer of Prescott and Miles, I am its majority shareholder." Silence thickened inside the squad car. Rachel blinked. Hensley snorted softly, as if brushing it off. "That's a bold claim." "It's not a claim," Danielle replied. "It's a fact. You'll find my name in the state corporate registry. You'll also find me listed as CEO of Carter Holdings, which owns controlling interest in this company. Every chandelier in that boutique, every salary paid, including Gregory Miles's, runs through contracts I sign." Her words landed like stones dropped in water, rippling outward. Rachel exchanged a quick glance with Hensley. "Sergeant, maybe we should." Hensley held up a hand. "We'll verify at the station." But his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Back at the boutique, the atmosphere had shifted. Gregory Miles poured himself a glass of water, but his hands shook faintly. The customers who remained whispered in small groups, phones still recording, videos already making their way online. Samantha Ortiz stood frozen by the counter, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream the truth, to tell everyone she believed Danielle, but fear still weighed heavy. A notification buzzed on a young man's phone, the one who had spoken out earlier. He glanced down, then let out a low whistle. "Yo, this is already on Twitter. Look." He held up his screen, showing a clip of Danielle's calm defiance as she was cuffed. The caption read, "Woman arrested in upscale store for not belonging, did nothing wrong, Chicago, 2025. Thousands of shares ticked upward by the minute. Samantha's stomach flipped. The world was watching now. In the squad car, Rachel's phone buzzed too. She glanced at it, lips parting as she recognized Danielle's face trending across platforms. She turned toward Hensley, her voice urgent. "Sergeant, we can't ignore this." "If what she says is true," Hensley rubbed his forehead, "we still follow procedure. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Danielle spoke again, her tone softer now, but every word precise. "This isn't the first time someone has tried to erase me, but I assure you, it will be the last time Gregory Miles humiliates anyone under my roof." Rachel swallowed. "Your roof?" "Yes," Danielle said, meeting her eyes through the rearview mirror. "That store is mine." The squad car pulled up to the precinct, its brick facade looming against the sky. Reporters had already begun to gather outside, tipped off by social media. Flashing cameras greeted them as Hensley opened the back door. Danielle stepped out, still cuffed, but walking with the poise of someone arriving at her own press conference. Questions erupted at once. What happened in the store? Why were you arrested? Is it true you're the owner? Danielle said nothing, only lifted her head higher. She knew timing was everything. Inside, at the booking desk, Hensley began the routine paperwork. Rachel, however, typed furiously into the computer, her brow furrowing as records confirmed Danielle's identity. She looked up, eyes wide. "Sergeant, she's telling the truth. She's listed as majority shareholder and CEO of Carter Holdings." Hensley froze mid-sentence. Slowly, he turned to Danielle, his face paling. "You're serious." Danielle's voice was steady as stone. "I don't speak unless I'm serious." Rachel pushed the screen toward him. "It's all here. Verified." The realization spread through the room like wildfire. Clerks paused. Officers leaned closer. Whispers turned into gasps. The woman, sitting calmly in cuffs, was not some trespasser. She was the boss, the kind of boss who could sign contracts that paid for their pensions. Hensley's throat went dry. "Unlock her." "Now." Rachel moved quickly, uncuffing Danielle's wrists. The metal fell away, leaving faint red marks on her skin. Danielle rubbed her wrists lightly, then straightened her blazer as though nothing had happened. Reporters outside pressed against the glass, their cameras flashing. Phones buzzed with breaking news alerts. Arrested woman revealed as CEO and owner of store. The story was spreading at lightning speed. Danielle looked at Hensley, her eyes unwavering. "I told you the truth would be clear soon enough." Back at Prescott and Miles. Gregory Miles scrolled his phone, his face draining of color as headlines blared his name. "Manager calls police on black woman, turns out she owns the store." His stomach twisted. The smug confidence that had carried him all morning evaporated, leaving behind only dread. Customers pointed at him, whispering, recording. Samantha stared openly now, no longer hiding her disapproval. For the first time since she'd been hired, she looked at her boss with nothing but contempt. Gregory set his phone down with shaking hands. "No, this can't be happening," he muttered. But it was. The truth Danielle had promised was already burning through the city like wildfire. At the precinct, Danielle turned to Rachel. "I'll need to make a statement, publicly, and I expect every word of what happened today to be documented accurately." Rachel nodded, her respect clear. "Yes, ma'am." Danielle's gaze shifted back to Hensley, who stood frozen in shame. "The difference between justice and humiliation," she said quietly, "often comes down to whether people are willing to see what's in front of them. Remember that." As she stepped out into the flashing lights of cameras and the sea of questions, Danielle Carter was no longer just the woman in cuffs. She was a symbol, a story, a mirror held up to a society that still struggled to see her worth. And Gregory Miles, miles away in his boutique, was already speechless, his downfall sealed by the very arrogance that had blinded him. By the time Danielle left the precinct, the city had already chosen sides. Crowds gathered on the sidewalks, their phones lifted high, broadcasting live to thousands. The story wasn't confined to Chicago anymore. It was everywhere. Hashtags climbing to the top of national trends. "She owns the store" blazed across screens, paired with the video of Danielle being cuffed, her calm voice echoing, "Remember this moment." The truth has a way of coming to light. News anchors replayed it on loop, commentators dissecting every detail, and strangers across the country typed furious threads demanding justice. Danielle stood at the steps of the precinct as microphones stretched toward her. Reporters shouted questions over each other. "How did it feel being arrested in your own store? Do you plan to fire the manager? What does this say about systemic racism in retail?" She lifted a hand. The crowd hushed not completely, but enough. Her voice carried with quiet authority. What happened today was not just about me. It was about the countless people who walk into stores, offices, and schools and are told in words or in silence, "You don't belong here." Today, I was cuffed for standing in a space I own. But many are cuffed simply for existing in spaces they have every right to be in. This is bigger than me, bigger than Gregory Miles. It is about dignity. The crowd erupted with applause and shouts of support. Danielle's calm, deliberate delivery gave her words weight, the kind of weight that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, back at Prescott and Miles, Gregory was unraveling. His phone buzzed nonstop with calls from corporate, from reporters, even from his own family. Each headline was a dagger. Manager calls cops on owner. Racial profiling at Prescott and Miles. She owns. The store sparks outrage. He tried to lock himself in his office, but customers lingered outside, filming themselves pointing at the door where Gregory Miles was etched on a brass plate. Samantha Ortiz sat at the counter, no longer afraid. She whispered to a coworker, "He's finished." Across the city, protests began to form. College students held handmade signs, "Dignity has no color." "Stop policing," "Black lives in public spaces." She owned it all along. Community leaders called for boycotts, demanding immediate accountability. Inside her downtown office, Danielle convened an emergency meeting with her executive team. Screens lit up as board members joined via video call. Some looked rattled, worried about the brand's reputation. Others were furious at the injustice. "Danielle," one board member said, "this could destroy us if we don't move fast. Investors are panicking." Danielle leaned forward, her eyes steady. "What happened today is not a scandal to hide. It's a sickness to cure. If we respond with silence or half measures, we will confirm what people already fear, that institutions like ours protect managers like Gregory instead of the people they harm. That ends now." Her words cut through the tension like a blade. Another board member asked cautiously, "Are you suggesting firing him immediately?" "I'm suggesting more than that." Danielle replied, "This is not about one man. This is about a culture that allowed him to believe he could act with impunity. We must uproot it, publicly." The executives shifted uneasily. Some feared the fallout, but one, a silver-haired woman named Linda Farrow, nodded slowly. "She's right. If we don't lead, we'll be forced to follow, and by then, it will be too late." Danielle's phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant. "CNN wants you live tonight." "Do you want to go on?" She typed back, "Yes," across Chicago. Gregory's name was already trending alongside hers. Memes mocked him. Clips replayed his smug demand, "She doesn't belong here," juxtaposed with headlines exposing Danielle's ownership. His arrogance had become the nation's punchline. But for Danielle, it wasn't about revenge, it was about resonance. She sat in her office that evening, the city lights stretching beyond the glass windows, and thought of her mother again. Clara had never lived to see her daughter own skyscrapers, lead corporations, or stand before cameras. But perhaps, in some way, her voice was alive in Danielle's calm defiance and her insistence on dignity. Her phone rang again. It was Rachel Moore, the young officer from earlier. Hesitant, almost apologetic. "Ms. Carter," Rachel began. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for not stopping it sooner, for not trusting you right away." Danielle's voice was gentle but firm. "Officer Moore, the fact that you verified the truth and acted quickly matters. What you do next matters more." Will you use this moment to see differently next time, to speak differently? Rachel swallowed. Yes, I will. Then don't apologize to me, Danielle said. Apologize to the next person who needs you to see them clearly. And don't just apologize, act. Rachel's voice cracked. Thank you. Danielle hung up, feeling the weight of the day settle over her shoulders. Exhaustion threatened to pull her under, but she knew rest would have to wait. This moment was bigger than her fatigue. The following morning, major newspapers carried her photo on the front page. CEO arrested in own store sparks national debate on racial bias. Editorials called it a watershed moment. Some praised her grace under pressure. Others demanded systemic reforms in retail, corporate culture, and policing. Outside Prescott and Miles, protesters gathered, chanting Danielle's words. The truth has a way of coming to light. Samantha Ortiz joined them after her shift, holding a sign that read, I work here. She belongs here. Inside his office, Gregory finally answered a call from corporate headquarters. The voice on the other end was clipped, cold. Pack your things. Security will escort you out within the hour. You are terminated effective immediately. Gregory sputtered, but the line went dead. For Danielle, the backlash was not about one man losing a job. It was about what his downfall represented, the possibility that arrogance and bias could no longer hide behind titles or uniforms. But she also knew this was only the beginning. Outrage was easy. Reform was harder. As the week unfolded, Danielle launched what she called the Dignity Initiative mandatory bias training for all Prescott and Miles employees, an anonymous reporting app that went straight to her executive team, and a commitment to reinvest profits into communities historically marginalized by the very industry she now led. The backlash had transformed into a movement, and at its center stood Danielle Carter, no longer just a CEO, no longer just a woman in cuffs, but a voice echoing what millions had long felt but rarely seen validated so publicly. Gregory, meanwhile, sat in his apartment, curtains drawn, phone buzzing with calls he no longer answered. The world outside had moved on without him, but the shadow of his arrogance lingered as a cautionary tale. And Danielle, gazing out her office window at the skyline glittering against the night, whispered again to her mother's memory, "We belong everywhere." Gregory Miles sat slumped on his couch, the blinds drawn tight against the glare of morning light. For decades, he had strutted through marble floors, telling others who did or didn't belong. Now, he couldn't even step outside his own apartment without the threat of someone pointing a phone at his face. The shame was suffocating. He switched on the television out of habit, hoping for distraction. But his own scowl filled the screen clips of him barking at Danielle Carter replayed alongside headlines that screamed his disgrace. Former manager calls police on owner. Racial bias caught on tape Gregory Miles out at Prescott and Miles. She owns, the store becomes rallying cry. He muted the TV, but silence was worse. His phone buzzed again, another voicemail from his brother. "You've ruined the family name. Don't bother coming to Thanksgiving." Gregory hurled the phone across the room, but the weight of the words clung to him like smoke. Across town, Danielle prepared for the most critical board meeting of her career. Though Gregory was gone, investors demanded answers. Shareholders wanted to know whether the brand could recover from the humiliation. Danielle adjusted her navy suit jacket, exhaling slowly as she looked at her reflection. She didn't just see herself. She saw the reflection of her mother, Clara's resilience, the quiet strength that had carried her through every storm. The boardroom was tense. Executives shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. Linda Farrow sat upright, hands folded, watching Danielle with calm trust. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat. "Danielle, we need clarity. How do you intend to prevent another Gregory Miles? How do you assure us that our reputation and our bottom line will survive this?" Danielle stood, her voice deliberate. "We can't control what people assume when they see someone who looks like me or Samantha Ortiz, or any number of customers who walk through our doors. But we can control our culture. We can set a new standard that makes it clear discrimination is not tolerated here, not in the shadows, not in silence." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up the Dignity Initiative. Bullet points appeared: mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight, a whistleblower hotline, community reinvestment. But Danielle didn't lean on the bullet points. She leaned on her story. "I was cuffed in my own store," she said quietly, "and I wasn't the first. Too many have been cuffed, metaphorically dismissed, humiliated, treated as less. We can either deny that truth and wait for the next scandal, or we can lead the change. If we do this right, we won't just survive, we'll thrive. People don't want another luxury brand that flaunts wealth. They want one that honors dignity." The room was silent. Then Linda spoke, her voice steady. "I second this proposal." Slowly, other board members nodded. A vote was called. The Dignity Initiative passed unanimously. News of the reform spread quickly, transforming the narrative. What had begun as a scandal was now reframed as a turning point. Commentators praised Danielle's leadership. Editorials called it bold. Customers began posting videos saying they felt proud to shop at Prescott and Miles again, especially after hearing about Samantha Ortiz's promotion to assistant manager under Danielle's guidance. But Gregory's fallout was far from over. Days later, police reopened a dormant shoplifting case involving a wealthy customer, Amanda Collins, the very thief Danielle had caught. Videos showed Gregory insisting Amanda was innocent while pressing charges against others who looked nothing like her. Investigators unearthed a troubling pattern. Gregory had a history of ignoring theft by affluent white clients while over-policing people of color. The revelation shattered whatever sympathy he still clung to. Talk shows shredded him. Civil rights groups called for his prosecution, not just his firing. Even old colleagues refused his calls. His once prized reputation as a sharp manager was now cemented as a cautionary tale of arrogance and prejudice. Meanwhile, Danielle faced her own private struggle. Each night, after the applause faded and the cameras shut off, she sat alone in her office. The memory of the handcuffs still burned. She had endured humiliation that no title or wealth could shield her from. It wasn't just her fight, it was personal. She thought of the young people watching online, kids who had seen her dignity and perhaps imagined their own futures differently because of it. One evening, Samantha knocked gently and entered. "Ms. Carter," she said, hesitating. "I wanted to thank you, not just for promoting me, but for showing me that people like us don't have to stay silent." Danielle smiled softly. "Samantha, you've earned your place here. Remember, leadership isn't about titles. It's about courage. You showed it when you stood still that day and didn't join Gregory's game. That's why you're here." Samantha's eyes glistened. "I won't let you down." Back in his apartment, Gregory watched the very same interview that made Samantha beam. He couldn't escape Danielle's name. It was everywhere on billboards, in op-eds, on late-night monologues. Every laugh track stung, every headline pierced. He tried applying for new jobs, but no company wanted the man whose name had become synonymous with prejudice. Recruiters stopped returning his calls. Even former employees posted stories about his arrogance online, adding fuel to the fire. His spiral deepened until one evening, as he scrolled through endless feeds mocking him, he saw Danielle on television again, this time speaking not about him, but about hope. "We can't rewrite yesterday," she said to a live audience, "but we can choose who we want to be tomorrow. My mother used to tell me, what matters is not the doors that close on you, but the ones you choose to open for others. That's what this company will do. That's what I intend to do." For the first time in days, Gregory felt something unfamiliar, the weight of regret. He saw, too late, that Danielle hadn't just destroyed him, she had transcended him. By the end of the month, Danielle's reforms were in motion. Customer satisfaction soared. Employees felt emboldened to speak up. Media outlets hailed Prescott and Miles as a model for change. And in living rooms across America, viewers replayed Danielle's words, finding in them a reflection of their own battles with bias, dignity, and belonging. Danielle knew the fight wasn't over, but as she stood once more in front of the gleaming displays of handbags and jewelry, she felt something shift. The marble floors no longer echoed with exclusion. They echoed with possibility. The media storm swelled into a hurricane. Cable news hosts dissected every angle of the scandal, from Gregory Miles's arrest to Danielle Carter's poised response. Evening programs aired montages of Danielle walking into boardrooms, her calm presence contrasting sharply with Gregory's past tirades. Social media burned with hashtags, "She owns," "The store," "Dignity matters," "Danielle Carter for change." Ordinary people began recording their own stories of bias and humiliation in retail stores, attaching her name as a symbol of hope. At first, Danielle resisted watching. She preferred to focus on work rolling out the Dignity Initiative, meeting with community leaders, reassuring investors, but she couldn't ignore the tidal wave. One afternoon, Linda Farrow placed a folded newspaper on her desk. "You should see this," Linda said softly. The headline read, "From Handcuffs to Hero: How Danielle Carter Redefined Leadership." The article praised not only her reforms but her composure. In a world where outrage dominates, the journalist wrote, Carter demonstrates the power of measured strength. Danielle leaned back in her chair, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She remembered the cold steel of the cuffs, the humiliation of being doubted in her own space. Now, that memory had been transformed into something larger, something that spoke to millions, but the attention carried a cost. That evening, as she walked to her car, cameras flashed. A reporter shouted, "Danielle, are you planning a political run? People are calling you the face of justice in business." Danielle kept walking, offering only a small smile. She had no such ambitions, yet she couldn't deny the ripple effect. Emails from advocacy groups filled her inbox, invitations to speak at universities arrived daily, and even a few lawmakers reached out for consultations on workplace fairness. Inside the store, employees felt the change. Samantha Ortiz noticed it first. Customers who once glanced past her now greeted her warmly. Some even congratulating her. She caught herself smiling more, standing taller. "It's like people finally see me." she confided to Danielle during one of their evening check-ins. Danielle nodded. "Because you showed them who you are. Samantha. The world just needed a nudge to notice." But not everyone was pleased. A handful of wealthy clients, loyal to Gregory, whispered about boycotts. Amanda Collins, the thief Danielle had exposed, tried to rally support by painting herself as the victim of corporate aggression. Her attorney even filed a defamation suit, which tabloids eagerly reported. Danielle's legal team swiftly dismantled the case, producing security footage that left Amanda red-faced in court. Still, the noise fed the storm. On one particularly tense morning, Danielle's assistant rushed into her office. "CNN wants you live tonight. So does MSNBC. Fox too, though they'll spin it their way." "What do you want me to tell them?" Danielle paused, then shook her head. "Not yet. This isn't about TV debates. It's about building something real. Tell them I'll speak when there's more than words to share." That restraint, ironically, made her even more appealing. Analysts marveled at her discipline, contrasting it with the theatrics of typical CEOs under fire. Her silence became its own kind of statement. Power didn't always need a microphone. Meanwhile, Gregory's collapse deepened. Tabloids published old photos of him at galas, contrasting them with current images of him leaving police stations, hunched and grim. Former employees began telling stories how he mocked accents, belittled junior staff, favored certain customers while humiliating others. His name became shorthand for arrogance in countless op-eds. One night, Danielle turned on the television and saw a panel discussion. A professor of sociology explained, "This isn't just about one man or one store. It's about structures that reward bias until someone forces accountability." Danielle Carter didn't just stand up for herself. She held up a mirror to an entire industry. The audience applauded. Danielle clicked the remote off, her chest tight. She didn't seek applause, but she realized the story had grown beyond her control. She represented something larger now, something people were desperate to believe in. Then came the twist she hadn't anticipated. A bipartisan group of senators reached out, inviting her to testify before a committee on corporate responsibility. The request shook her. She had always worked behind the scenes, letting results speak. Standing before Congress meant entering the political arena, an arena full of cameras, agendas, and traps. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. Clara's framed photo watched from the shelf, her mother's smile both comforting and demanding. Danielle whispered aloud, as if to her mother, "Do I take this step, or is this a distraction?" She thought of Samantha, of employees who now walked taller. She thought of Gregory, whose downfall was both personal and symbolic. She thought of the countless voices online saying, "She speaks for me," and she knew the answer. The next morning, she informed Linda, "I'll testify. Not for politics, but for dignity." When news broke, headlines roared again. Danielle Carter heads to Capitol Hill. Editorials speculated about her future. Some pundits whispered the word governor. But Danielle ignored the noise. She focused on crafting a testimony rooted not in ambition, but in truth. In the days leading up to the hearing, Samantha worked late with her, helping compile employee stories. "Use my story," Samantha insisted. "Tell them what it feels like to be invisible until someone believes in you." Danielle promised she would. The hearing arrived on a crisp Monday morning. Cameras flashed as Danielle walked up the marble steps of the Capitol. She wore a simple navy dress, No jewelry except her mother's ring. Inside, the chamber buzzed with anticipation. Senators leaned forward, ready to probe, to test, to challenge. Danielle placed her notes on the table but didn't look at them. Instead, she raised her eyes to meet the room. "My name is Danielle Carter. I am the majority shareholder of Prescott and Miles. But before that, I am the daughter of Clara Carter, who taught me that dignity is not a luxury. It is a birthright." Her words carried steady weight. She told the story of that afternoon, the handcuffs, the humiliation, the quiet strength it took to remain calm. She spoke of Samantha, of employees who thrived when given space to be seen. She spoke of Gregory's downfall not with glee, but with sorrow for a system that had enabled him. And she spoke of reform, urging Congress to encourage, not mandate, corporations to take ownership of their cultures. Laws can set boundaries, she concluded, but only leadership can set values. My plea is simple. Let dignity be the value we refuse to compromise. The chamber was silent for a beat, then filled with applause. Even senators who had come prepared to grill her found themselves nodding. Cameras captured the moment, and by evening, the clip was everywhere. Back home, Samantha watched from her living room, tears streaming down her cheeks. She did it, she whispered, in a small apartment across town. Gregory watched too, his face pale. For him, the applause was another nail in the coffin of his former life. Danielle returned home that night exhausted but clear-eyed. She knew the storm was far from over, but she also knew she had weathered it with integrity intact. The nation now saw her not as a victim, not even as just a CEO, but as a leader for something deeper, the right of every person to stand in their own space without apology. When Danielle stepped off the plane back in Atlanta, she expected silence, perhaps a few reporters. Instead, she found a crowd gathered outside the terminal, holding signs that read "Dignity for All" and "We Stand with Danielle." Children perched on their parents' shoulders waved, and someone handed her a bouquet of sunflowers. She forced a smile, waving politely, but her chest felt tight. Public adoration was a strange weight to carry. She had walked into Congress as a business leader. She returned home a symbol. At home, that evening, her apartment felt emptier than usual. She placed the flowers in a vase, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the framed photo of Clara. The silence pressed on her, as if asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. She thought of her testimony, the applause, the headlines. Everyone saw strength, but inside, she wrestled with exhaustion. How long could she carry this? The following weekend, Danielle attended a community event organized by a coalition of churches and nonprofits. She arrived quietly, without security or press, hoping simply to listen. The gathering was held in a school gym, folding chairs lined in neat rows, the air smelling faintly of popcorn and floor polish. People spoke one after another, single mothers, veterans, high school students sharing stories of bias they had endured in the stores, banks, even hospitals. One young man named Jordan stood, his voice shaking. "When I saw Ms. Carter on TV, I thought, finally, someone who knows what it feels like. I've been followed in stores since I was 14. I just want to be treated like a customer, not a suspect." Danielle blinked back tears. When the moderator asked if she'd like to speak, she hesitated. She had come to listen, but the crowd turned to her expectantly. Slowly, she rose. "I wish I could tell you I never felt what you just described. she said, voice quiet but steady. "But I have. That day, in my own store. I wore handcuffs. I know the weight of humiliation, and I know the power of standing up, even when your voice shakes. That's why we keep going, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us." The room erupted in applause. Jordan wiped his eyes. In that moment, Danielle realized something vital. Her leadership wasn't about corporations or Capitol Hill. It was about people like Jordan, about transforming pain into collective strength. Yet, when she returned home that night, the loneliness returned too. The world saw a beacon, but inside, she was still a daughter missing her mother. Clara had always been her compass, the one who reminded her to rest, to breathe. Without her, Danielle sometimes felt like she was steering blind. Linda noticed. One afternoon in the office, Linda closed the door behind her. "You're burning out," she said gently. "You can't pour into others if your own well runs dry." Danielle smiled weakly. "I'm fine." "No, you're not. You've been carrying everyone's stories on your shoulders. That's noble, but unsustainable. You need space to be Danielle, not just the symbol." Her words lingered long after Linda left. That evening, Danielle finally allowed herself to sit on the balcony with a journal. She wrote down her fears. What if I fail them? What if this is bigger than me? What if I lose myself in all this noise? Tears blurred the ink. For the first time in months, she let herself cry without restraint. Not for the cameras, not for the cause, just for herself. The release was painful but necessary, like exhaling after holding her breath too long. The next day, Samantha stopped by her office. She carried a worn paperback, its cover taped together. "This was my mother's," she said, placing it on Danielle's desk. The title read, "The Fire Next Time" by James Baldwin. "When I felt invisible, I read his words and believed I still mattered. I think you need it now." Danielle traced the cracked spine. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening, she read Baldwin's words on resilience, on dignity born from suffering. They felt like a hand on her shoulder, urging her forward. Meanwhile, in the broader community, Danielle's name inspired action. Local universities launched Carter Fellowships for students, researching equity in business. Churches held Dignity Sundays, teaching youth about respect and resilience. Even police departments began citing her testimony in training sessions. But the pressure mounted too. Every misstep, a delayed shipment. A misquoted statement was magnified by media eager to spin narratives. Anonymous letters arrived, some praising her, others laced with threats. One night, a brick shattered the glass of her office window, a note taped to it, "Stay in your lane." Fear twisted in her stomach. For the first time, she considered stepping back, but when she saw Samantha the next morning, standing firm despite the broken glass, Danielle straightened her shoulders. "We keep going," she said simply. A week later, she returned to the community center. Jordan approached her shyly, clutching a sketchbook. "I drew something for you," he said, flipping it open. It was a portrait of Danielle, not in a suit or at a podium, but sitting with her hands folded, eyes steady. Above her, he had written, "Strength is quiet until it needs to be heard." Her throat tightened. "This means more than you know," she told him. That night, Danielle placed the drawing beside Clara's photo. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't carrying this alone anymore. The community carried it with her. Her private struggles remained loneliness, exhaustion, fear, but they no longer defined her. They were threads in a larger tapestry, woven with the stories of people who refused to stay silent. Danielle understood now that her role wasn't to fix everything. It was to keep the fire burning long enough for others to add their lot. Gregory Miles had been silent for months. After his arrest and public disgrace, most assumed he had slipped into obscurity. Yet, silence was never Gregory's nature. Behind the scenes, he simmered with rage, convinced that Elias Carter had orchestrated his downfall. Pride blinded him to the truth. His own arrogance and cruelty had set the stage. Late one evening, Danielle's office phone rang. Her assistant patched through a call from an unknown number. A familiar voice slithered through the line. "You think you've won." "Danielle," Gregory sneered. "But you don't know the half of it. I still have friends. You'll see soon enough." Danielle didn't flinch. "Gregory, the only thing you still have is a past you refuse to own. Don't waste what's left of your life on bitterness." She ended the call, her hand steady, but her mind alert. She knew this wasn't idle talk. Gregory's threats were rarely empty. Within weeks, strange disruptions surfaced. Anonymous complaints flooded customer service lines, accusing Prescott and Miles of discrimination clearly fabricated. A smear campaign online claimed Danielle had used her wealth to silence victims. Employees whispered about rumors of layoffs, though none were true. The chaos had Gregory's fingerprints all over it. Danielle convened her leadership team. "We cannot play whack-a-mole with lies," she said firmly. "We will respond with transparency. Every complaint gets investigated and reported publicly. Every rumor gets met with truth. If Gregory wants war, we'll answer with integrity." Her strategy worked. Customers appreciated the honesty. Shareholders praised the resilience. But Gregory wasn't finished. One afternoon, Danielle walked into a shareholder meeting to find Gregory himself standing outside, handing out leaflets. His hair was disheveled, his suit ill-fitting, but his eyes burned with defiance. "Don't trust her," he shouted to passers-by. "She's a fraud. She bought her way into power. She'll ruin this company." Security moved quickly, but Danielle raised a hand. "Let him speak," she instructed. The room hushed. Gregory smirked, sensing opportunity. He stormed into the hall, waving his papers. "You people worship her. But what do you really know? She pretends to be a savior, but she's just another tyrant. She humiliated me, destroyed my career, turned me into a villain." His voice cracked, more desperation than fury. Danielle rose slowly from her seat. Her calm presence contrasted with his frenzy. "Gregory, no one destroyed you but yourself. You chose arrogance over empathy, cruelty over kindness. I didn't put those handcuffs on you, you put them on yourself the day you decided dignity was optional." The room erupted in murmurs. Cameras flashed as reporters scribbled. Gregory's face reddened. He lunged forward, shouting incoherently, until security restrained him. Still, Danielle's words echoed louder than his rage. Later that evening, Samantha entered Danielle's office, eyes wide. "That was incredible. You didn't just shut him down. You showed everyone the difference between leadership and bitterness." Danielle exhaled slowly. It wasn't about shutting him down. It was about showing that dignity doesn't flinch in the face of chaos. But Gregory's final act was yet to come. Days later, during a live interview on national television, he appeared unexpectedly as part of a panel. Danielle, seated across from him, was caught off guard. The host, eager for ratings, introduced him with a flourish tonight, a confrontation months in the making. Gregory wasted no time. "She's a fraud," he repeated, voice trembling with both rage and fatigue. "She ruined me. She pretends to be about dignity, but she's just another corporate tyrant." Danielle let him rant for nearly a minute. Then she leaned forward, her tone measured. "Gregory, I don't hate you. I pity you. Because even now, when the world has shown you the cost of cruelty, you choose to double down instead of grow. You had a chance to change, to rebuild, to show humility. Instead, you've become a warning, not a leader." The silence in the studio was electric. Gregory's mouth opened, then closed. For once, he had no retort. Viewers across the country watched, riveted. By morning, clips of the exchange dominated social media. Headlines declared Carter ends the debate with grace. Gregory disappeared from the public eye after that night. No more threats, no more smear campaigns. Whether it was humiliation or exhaustion that silenced him, Danielle never knew. What she did know was that dignity had won not just in her store, not just in her company, but in the broader conversation her story had ignited. Alone, later that evening, Danielle sat with her journal. She wrote a single line: "True power doesn't shout, it endures." She closed the book, feeling a quiet peace settle in her chest. For the first time since the handcuffs clicked around her wrists months ago, she allowed herself to believe the storm had passed. Months after the confrontation with Gregory Miles, the frenzy of headlines finally began to calm, but the seeds Danielle Carter had planted were taking root everywhere. What began as a personal humiliation in her own store had transformed into a nationwide movement toward accountability and dignity. The ripple effect surprised even her. She hadn't sought to become a symbol, yet that was precisely what she had become. At Prescott and Mile, change was visible on every floor. The Dignity Initiative wasn't just a policy anymore, it was a culture. Store associates were empowered to speak up when they saw unfair treatment, and customers noticed. Reports of bias incidents dropped sharply, while customer satisfaction reached record highs. Samantha Ortiz, once hesitant to raise her voice, now led workshops for new employees. Her story became a cornerstone of the company's training, reminding everyone that fairness wasn't abstract, it was lived experience. One afternoon, Danielle visited a downtown store unannounced. She wandered through aisles, greeting employees. At the register, she watched as a young cashier treated a nervous teenage boy with patience and warmth, even though the boy fumbled with his change. Danielle smiled, realizing this was what culture looked like, not policies on paper, but people choosing dignity in real time. Beyond her company, other corporations began adopting similar reforms. Universities studied the Carter model. Lawmakers cited her congressional testimony in drafting bills that encouraged transparency in workplace reporting. The phrase Carter Standard began circulating in business circles, shorthand for accountability tied to humanity. Danielle sometimes laughed at the term, but she also recognized its weight. Her name now represented something far larger than her own story. Still, Danielle was careful to resist the pedestal others placed her on. In speeches, she emphasized that she was no savior. "I'm one woman who refused to bow her head," she told a packed auditorium at Howard University. "But real change doesn't rest on one person. It grows when we all decide dignity is non-negotiable." The audience erupted in applause. But she knew her words mattered only if people carried them into their own lives. In private, Danielle remained grounded. She continued her evening journaling, often writing letters to her late mother, Clara. One entry read, "Mom, I still hear your voice reminding me to choose grace. I didn't always want to. Anger would have been easier, but grace built something anger never could. I hope I've made you proud. Linda Farrow, ever the steady mentor, saw the transformation too. You've turned survival into legacy," she told Danielle during a quiet dinner. "That's no small thing." Danielle smiled, but her eyes softened. "It's still hard. Linda, every time someone calls me a role model, I feel the weight of their expectations. What if I stumble?" "Then stumble," Linda replied, "but stumble with honesty. That's what people trust, not perfection integrity." Meanwhile, Gregory Miles had faded into near obscurity. After his televised collapse, he withdrew completely. Rumors circulated of him leaving the country, though nothing was confirmed. Danielle rarely thought of him anymore. To her, he wasn't the villain of her story, but the shadow against which her message had been cast. His downfall mattered less than the transformation his arrogance had unintentionally sparked. Samantha's journey mirrored Danielle's in miniature. Once an overlooked assistant manager, she was now a regional leader, overseeing diversity initiatives across multiple stores. In a staff meeting, she admitted nervously, "I used to be afraid to speak up. I thought silence kept me safe, but silence just kept me invisible. Ms. Carter taught me that dignity starts when we use our voices, even if they shake." Applause filled the room. Danielle, seated quietly at the back, blinked away tears. One evening, Danielle received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, "Because of you, I reported the harassment at my job. They finally listened. I thought no one ever would. Thank you." Danielle folded the note carefully and placed it in her journal. That letter, more than any headline or award, reminded her why the fight mattered. The following spring, Danielle was invited to deliver a keynote address at the Business Ethics Summit in Chicago. The room brimmed with CEOs, lawmakers, academics, and students. Standing at the podium, she spoke not with fiery rhetoric but with calm conviction. "Legacy isn't built in boardrooms or courtrooms," she began. "It's built in everyday moments, how we greet a customer, how we treat a colleague, how we respond when bias whispers in our ear. Too often, companies measure success only in dollars, but the true bottom line is dignity. Without it, no profit is sustainable." She paused, letting the words settle. Cameras flashed, pens scratched, but the silence in the room spoke louder than any applause. When she finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation, not because she dazzled them with charisma, but because she reminded them of something simple and true. Afterward, a young woman approached her. "I'm studying business because of you," she said shyly. "I want to build companies that don't just sell things, they honor people. Thank you for showing me it's possible." Danielle clasped her hand. "Then my story has done its job," she replied. By the end of that year, Danielle had stepped back slightly from the spotlight, allowing others like Samantha and community leaders to carry the torch forward. She continued her work quietly, guiding from behind the scenes, ensuring the reforms endured. She no longer needed to prove herself to anyone. Her legacy was already etched into the lives she had touched. One night, as she closed her office, she stopped to look out at the city skyline. Lights twinkled like 1,000 quiet testimonies, each one a story of someone choosing dignity over disdain. She whispered to the night, "This is bigger than me, and that's how it should be." Winter settled gently over Atlanta, the city streets lined with twinkling lights and storefronts decorated in evergreen garlands. For Danielle Carter, the season brought not just the turning of a year, but the closing of a chapter that had begun with humiliation and ended with transformation. She walked through one of her stores on a chilly evening, unaccompanied and unnoticed by most customers, taking in the quiet hum of commerce and conversation. Shoppers browsed, associates offered assistance with warm smiles, and laughter floated near the children's section. It was ordinary, and that ordinariness was what made it extraordinary. Danielle paused near the register, where a young associate patiently explained a return policy to an elderly man. The exchange was polite, human, devoid of condescension. Danielle smiled, realizing this was the future she had fought for, not policies etched in handbooks, but dignity woven into everyday acts. She slipped out before anyone recognized her, letting the employees own the moment. Later that night, in the solitude of her apartment, she brewed a cup of tea and opened her journal. The city skyline glowed beyond her window. She wrote slowly, reflecting on the journey. What began as a pair of handcuffs became a movement I never asked for but could not ignore. I learned that dignity is not just defended in dramatic confrontations, but in the smallest choices, repeated until they shape culture. My mother was right. Grace is strength in its purest form. She closed the book and sat in silence, remembering Clara's voice. For so long, she had carried her mother's memory like a compass, guiding her through storms. Now, she felt as though Clara's presence was not only behind her, but within her, lived out in the reforms, the communities uplifted, the people like Samantha who had stepped into their own light. The next morning, Danielle attended a small ceremony at a community center, where the first recipients of the Carter Fellowship were being announced. Dozens of students sat nervously in folding chairs, their families in the back rows. When their names were called, the students beamed with pride, walking across the stage to shake Danielle's hand. She looked into each pair of eyes, offering encouragement. Your voice matters. Led with dignity. Never doubt your place. After the ceremony, Jordan, the young man who had once spoken about being followed in stores, approached her with his sketchbook. He had drawn a new portrait, this time of a crowd standing together, faces diverse, united under the words, "We belong." Danielle felt tears sting her eyes as she hugged him. "You're not just an artist, Jordan," she whispered. "You're a visionary." On her way out, she overheard a woman telling her daughter, "See, that's the lady I told you about, the one who stood tall when they tried to bring her down." The little girl looked up, eyes wide, and waved shyly. Danielle waved back, humbled by the weight of being seen. Despite the public recognition, Danielle's private life remained simple. She declined most television interviews, preferring community gatherings and one-on-one mentorship. She spent weekends visiting bookstores, sipping coffee in quiet cafes, and writing letters to young leaders who reached out. To her, legacy wasn't built in grand gestures but in steady investment, one person at a time. Linda Farrow often reminded her of this during their evening walks. You've given people hope, Danielle, not because you're flawless, but because you showed them what resilience looks like. Danielle would nod, though sometimes the words felt heavy. Hope was a gift, but it was also a responsibility. One evening, Samantha joined Danielle for dinner. Between bites of roasted chicken, Samantha said, "I used to think my story didn't matter. Now, people ask me to speak at schools. Kids tell me they see themselves in me. That's because of you." Danielle shook her head gently. "It's because of you. I may have opened a door, but you walk through it, and you're holding it open for the next person." Samantha smiled, her eyes shining. Maybe that's what dignity is, passing the torch. Danielle thought about that long after Samantha left. Passing the torch, the idea comforted her. She didn't need to carry the whole fire forever. Others had taken up the flame, and that was enough. As spring approached, Danielle was invited to deliver a commencement address at a university. Standing before rows of graduates in black caps and gowns, she spoke from the heart. "The world will tell you where you belong," she said, her voice steady. "Sometimes it will try to shrink you, to hand you labels you never chose. But dignity is reclaiming your space. It's saying, 'I belong here, not because you permit it, but because I am human.' Carry that truth into every room you enter. Let it shape not only your career but your community." The applause was thunderous. Students rose to their feet, cheering. Danielle felt a surge of warmth, not pride in herself, but hope for them. The future was already unfolding in their hands. That evening, back home, she sat on her balcony with a glass of iced tea. The city below buzzed with life, cars honking, laughter spilling from restaurants. She felt, for the first time in years, a deep peace settle over her. The storm had passed. The scars remained, but so did the strength they forged. She whispered softly into the night, as though speaking to Clara. "We did it. Mom. Not just me, all of us. Dignity isn't just an idea anymore. It's alive." The hum of the city answered, steady and unbroken, like the rhythm of resilience itself. Danielle closed her eyes, knowing the story wasn't ending here. It was only beginning in the lives of those who now carried the flame forward. Her legacy was not the scandal that once tried to define her, nor even the reform she championed. Her legacy was hope that dignity could prevail, even in the unlikeliest of places. The story of Danielle Carter reminds us of a simple but powerful truth: dignity is not given, it is lived. In moments of injustice, we all face a choice to shrink under prejudice or to rise with grace. Danielle's calm strength shows that dignity does not need to shout. It needs to stand firm, rooted in self-respect. Her experience is a mirror for all of us. Many older viewers may recall times when they, too, were dismissed or underestimated because of how they looked, where they came from, or what others assumed about them. The lesson is not only about personal resilience, but also about responsibility. Danielle didn't just defend herself. She used her position to change the culture of her stores, to uplift employees like Samantha, and to ensure future customers would be treated with fairness. In life, each of us may not own a business, but we own our choices. We can decide whether to ignore injustice or to create spaces of respect in our families, our workplaces, and our communities. Her story is a call to carry dignity into everyday interactions. True change begins not with policies, but with people choosing respect over prejudice. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and walking through this journey. Stories like Danielle's remind us why standing up for dignity and justice matters. If this story touched you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. Your support helps us continue creating content that uplifts, challenges, and heals. We're grateful to have you here. See you in the next story.